You're with BBC News. Hello, I'm Karin Giannone in the newsroom in London. We are going to take you to Bradford Crown Court very shortly because Mr Justice Cotter will be sentencing a man who stabbed his wife to death in front of their infant son after tracking her to a refuge. He was found guilty of murder back in June. Habibur Masoom stabbed his wife, Kulsuma Akhtar, more than 25 times after confronting her in Bradford while she pushed their 7-month-old son in a pram in April 2024. The baby was unharmed. The Bradford Crown Court, during the trial, heard that Ms Akhtar had been living in a refuge in the city since January because her husband, Mr Masoom, had held a knife to her throat at their home in Oldham. He is now about to be sentenced by the judge. Let's go to the court now.
Habibur Masoom, you may remain seated until I tell you to stand. You have been found guilty of the murder of your wife, Kulsuma Akhtar. As her brother, Emrah Hussain, and her sister-in-law, Minara Begum, explained in most moving impact statements, the terrible and unimaginable pain of her loss has had a huge impact on her parents, siblings, family, and friends. They have described how the massive loss of Kulsuma has left a deep and painful void, which the family feel on a daily basis. They now face a life sentence of grief with no release date. Kulsuma's son will never know his mother. For the grave offence of murder, there is only one sentence prescribed by law, and that is imprisonment for life. And that is the sentence that I shall impose upon you in due course. However, I am required to determine the minimum period you should serve in prison before you are eligible to be considered for release on parole. To decide the minimum term, I must consider the facts of the case. I must be sure to the criminal standard of the factual basis of my sentence. I've had help from the sentencing notes and oral submissions from both prosecution and defence, for which I am most grateful. I also have to sentence you for 4 other offences: assault by beating, making a threat to kill, stalking involving a fear of violence, and possession of a bladed article. Kulsuma Akhtar was born on the 2nd of April 1997 and was aged 27 years at the date of her death. You met and married Kulsuma in Bangladesh and you moved to the UK in the March of 2022, having finished your degree in English literature to do a course of marketing here at the University of Bedfordshire. You travelled on a student visa with Kulsuma accompanying you. Whilst you initially lived in Dunstable, but then moved to Burnley, Kulsuma lived with her brother, Akhtar, in Oldham and worked at Park's Bakery. When Kulsuma blocked your messages, you went to see her in Oldham on the 4th of August. You'd bought a knife and brought it with you. You went to her workplace, and then when you couldn't find her, you went to the tram station in front of where she was living and stayed there all day waiting for her. When the police found you, you were half conscious. When asked about matters at the hospital, you said that you felt like you would kill her, and that when you fought with her, you felt like you were going to kill her and or yourself. You were advised to go to a GP, which you never did. You had a marriage celebration on the 7th of September 2022 and began to live as husband and wife. On the 23rd of January, in January 2023, Kulsuma fell pregnant. And in July 2023, there was an argument which resulted in Kulsuma leaving the house, as she believed that you had divorced her by screaming, as you described it, talaq 3 times at her. She went to her family and you messaged her and constantly called her, telling her that you were going to do crazy things because she was not with you and was at home. You kept asking her, where was the kitchen knife? Given what you were saying about knives, the family were worried for your safety as well as Kulsama's and called the police. I now turn to the events of the 23rd and 24th of November 2023, which resulted in counts 3 and 4 on the indictment. Kulsuma was on maternity leave and received a text from a colleague at work asking if she was working. It was your habit to check her phone, and such was your controlling behaviour, she needed to ask for permission before she went to meet anyone, even her own family. The message incensed you and sent your jealousy into overdrive. You threw her phone against a wall and assaulted her, slapping her face while she held your son on her lap. You also held a knife to her throat, stating, "I'm going to murder you, and the police will be taking me. And tell me what your relationship is with him, or I will kill you." Kulsuma then acted very sensibly in calling the police and locking herself in the bathroom when they came. She set out in a statement that she was very frightened. When you were holding the knife, she believed what you were telling her. She told the police that because of how scared the incident had made her, she did not want to stay with you. As a result of what she knew of your behaviour, Kulsama was able to predict to her sister-in-law, "I will be killed. You may find my dead body someday," and asked her sister-in-law that if you killed her, would she look after your son? You were arrested and detained, and it speaks volumes for your attitude to the law that when given permission by the police to make a phone call, you called your brother and told him to make contact with Kulsuma. Subsequently, you were to ignore bail conditions, not to contact Kulsuma directly. Kulsuma was found a place in a refuge. The state had done what it could to protect her from you, but you made a mistake in posting a message which allowed you to track her location. It is indeed a sad fact that it can be very difficult to entirely protect a woman in a refuge from a determined and cunning man intent on confrontation. Kulsuma settled into the refuge and made some friends, and her family arranged for you to see your son on a couple of occasions, as you not adequately pursued your ability to do so through social services. At this time, neither your professed love for Kulsuma or depression prevented you from being on Tinder to find a date. Next, you threatened the 5 members of Kulsuma's family who live in the UK. You messaged Kulsuma's brother, stating, "If I don't get my family back by the 1st, I will kill everyone." And messaged Kulsuma on Snapchat, stating, "I will kill 5 of them." You then did a daily countdown. As Kulsuma stated to her social worker, Amy Tucker, the threats had made her worried about her family, she was mentally disturbed and distressed. You then travelled from Oldham to Bradford so that you could confront her. In the late evening of the 28th of March, you were captured on CCTV, loitering in the area of the refuge. Next day, the 29th, you sent Kulsuma a Snapchat video of Bradford Interchange railway station with a message saying that you'd come to her town, and 20 minutes later, a video showing the outside of the refuge. You wanted her to know that you had tracked her down. You were cunning enough to use Snapchat so that the messages disappeared after they were read. When Kulsuma reported your messages to social services, they knew that she was no longer safe there, and they arranged for her to move refuge. It is a very sad fact that had she not been tricked out of the refuge by you on the Saturday afternoon, she would have been moved to another refuge on the Monday. Tuesday, the 2nd of April, you were back in Bradford and loitering in the vicinity of the refuge. You then bought a new mobile phone so that Kulsuma would not recognise your number, and made the first of 5 quite convincing messages from GP health centres about vaccinations for your son in attempts to trick her out of the refuge. You also instructed your brother to say that you were at the airport. However, your attempts to get Kulsuma to leave the refuge were unsuccessful, so you checked into a hotel in Bradford overnight. 3rd of April, you were still in Bradford and sent the 3rd, 4th and 5th false medical appointments, but you were still unable to get Kulsuma out of the refuge. On the 4th of April, so the Thursday, you started to make arrangements to go to France by taxi, although you had no visa. You were told that the pickup would be from Birmingham and that the next pickup was on Monday the 8th of April. You said you'd call after fixing the date. I am satisfied so that I am sure that you were planning to get out of the country if you attacked Kulsuma. On Saturday the 6th of April, you came back to Bradford, arriving just after 11:30 a.m. You had a knife with you. You loitered in the area around the refuge for 3.5 hours, waiting for Kulsuma to come out. As she was convinced that you were in Spain, Kulsuma came out of the refuge with a fellow resident, known for the purposes of this case as Jordan Palmer, at 3 o'clock to go to the local bazaar to buy some henna because Eid was approaching. When Kulsuma got to the bazaar, she was met with you coming out. She was shocked to see you because your brother had told her that you were in Spain. It is obvious that Kulsuma then tried to head back to the refuge. You're seen walking with her, and eventually you stop outside a general store. Your interaction with her is caught on CCTV. You move the pram and are seen waving a finger at her. I have no doubt, fearful of you as she was, that she did nothing to provoke or annoy you. At 3:16 p.m, you pulled out a knife from your pocket and attacked her in the full view of passers-by. You stabbed her, deliberately targeting her front, and when she was on the ground, you stamped on her before finally cutting her throat. The footage is very distressing to view. She sustained 26 wounds. One to her neck, a shocking one through her face, an 8-centimetre deep wound to the upper chest, and 12 others. There were also 11 incised wounds. Her injuries include defensive ones to her left hand and left arm, caused as she tried to fend off the knife. The most significant injury was the stab wound to the neck, which cut through the windpipe and jugular vein. The nature and extent of your attack proves beyond all reasonable doubt that you intended to kill her. Jordan Palmer was terrified that you would attack her. And unsurprisingly, given the busy location, the attack was witnessed by members of the public, 6 of whom have given statements that were read to the jury. You calmly walked off after the attack, significantly showing no interest in your son, who on your evidence you were missing so badly, throwing the knife into a nearby car park. Kulsuma was helped by Dr. Suleiman and his wife, who saw a large group on the pavement and Kulsuma on the floor. They tried to do their best, but the reality was that the wounds that you had inflicted were unsurvivable, as was your intention. As attempts were being made to save Kulsuma's life, you were walking to the city centre to catch a bus. You made a 10-minute WhatsApp call to your mother, during which you did 5 things. You made 3 financial transactions, transferring £800 to your brother. You booked an Uber to Birmingham, and then you got on the bus. The CCTV from the bus shows that, to say the least, you were not obviously distressed when you got on and sat down. You then put on your phone into airplane mode so as to avoid being located. I have no doubt that you have a greater memory of the attack and its aftermath than you have told the jury. By the following day, Sunday the 7th, you travelled south to Aylesbury and were caught on CCTV buying new training shoes and a mobile phone, whilst accompanied by another man. You had your hood up to hide your face. You made attempts to avoid being recognised before you could leave the country. You changed your facial appearance, shaving your beard, cutting your hair. You wore a different coat, different trousers, different footwear. But you were then unlucky. You had a problem with your jaw, which had locked on previous occasions, and whilst yawning, it dislocated again. But for this, I have doubts you would have been apprehended before you left the country. You went to Stoke Mandeville to get some emergency treatment, and although you gave a false name, you were eventually arrested in the car park in the early hours of the 9th of April. For the grave offence of murder, there is only one sentence prescribed by law, and that is imprisonment for life. As I've said, I am required to determine the minimum period that you should serve in prison before you're eligible to be considered for release on parole. But it is most important that you and everyone concerned in this case understands what the minimum term means. The minimum term is not a fixed term after which you will be automatically released, but the minimum term that you will spend in custody before your case can be considered by the parole board. It will be the parole board, if you have not been deported, who will say at that time whether or not you have been released. If and when you are released, you will still be the subject of licence, and this will be the case for the rest of your life. If for any reason your licence were to be revoked, you will be recalled to prison to serve your life sentence in custody. In coming to the appropriate minimum term, I must first decide where this case falls within the section of the Act that is relevant and Schedule 21. Here, you took a knife to the scene to have it available to use as a weapon, so the starting point is 25 years. I am sure that you had no thoughts of self-harm on the 6th of April. The knife was bought and taken to the scene with only one use in mind. Every case will be subject to its own specific and individual features of aggravation and mitigation, and in all cases, what must be achieved is a just result. I now turn to the relevant aggravating and mitigating factors. The minimum term will reflect all of your offences, and the other sentences will be concurrent. 2 offences are of prior domestic abuse through violence and threats to kill. As I have said, such was your behaviour that Kulsuma was able to predict her own death at your hands. You stalked Kulsuma when she was still in the refuge, causing her to have a legitimate fear of further violence. I will not double count your behaviour reflected in these offences within the other aggravating factors. Your murder of Kulsuma was the most serious of domestic abuse offences. As set out in the relevant guidelines, such offences are rightly regarded as particularly serious within the criminal justice system because they represent a violation of the trust and security that normally exists between people in an intimate relationship. Kulsuma was your wife and the mother of your son. There was a significant degree of planning and premeditation, with your repeated attempts to trick Kulsuma into leaving the safety of the refuge with a new phone used to send false medical appointments, and also getting your brother to lie about being in Spain. You also made plans to leave the country after the attack. You acted in breach of bail conditions by going to Bradford on the 6th of April, conditions specifically designed to protect Kulsuma. It was a sustained and excessively violent attack, and Kulsuma suffered mentally and physically before her death as she tried to protect herself. The attack was in a busy city centre location on a Saturday afternoon, a shocking event which any of those involved are unlikely ever to forget. You then took careful steps to avoid apprehension before you were arrested, having little option but attend hospital. I turn to mitigation. You had no previous convictions, cautions, warnings or reprimands before these offences were committed. I turn to your mental health. The jury rejected the defence of diminished responsibility. However, if an offender suffered from a mental disorder which, although not substantially impairing the ability to exercise self-control, lowered his or her degree of culpability, that may be a mitigating factor. I've carefully considered whether the depression you were suffering lowered your culpability for the murder. You had moderately severe depression that solely arose from the effects of your own controlling and coercive behaviour, and was then aggravated by your criminal behaviour, and in particular when your assault and threats to kill Kulsuma led to her being in a refuge and not with you and under your control. I bear in mind that Dr. Farnham's analysis was to a large degree dependent on information you have given him, which was not true. As the psychiatrists agreed, as distinct from any depression, your personality included a tendency, I'm satisfied, a strong tendency, to be controlling, angry, jealous and possessive. You understood the nature of your conduct and could make rational decisions, but I have considered the extent to which the depression turned up the volume, to use Dr. Farnham's phrase, or the intensity of your personality traits, and impacted on self-control. Whether any effect on your mood, irritability, hopelessness, anger, control of impulse and emotions, or problem-solving played any real part in your actions and affected your culpability. I am satisfied that the contribution of depression to your murder was very limited, so there is only a very limited effect on your culpability. You exaggerated your emotional state during the interviews and the extent to which you were missing your son. You never had any intention of harming yourself. You were able to carefully plan how to engineer an opportunity to confront Kulsuma and try by clever false messages, even a fake Instagram of yourself in Spain, to try and trick her out of the refuge over a number of days, travelling back and forth to Bradford. You bought the knife with one purpose in mind. This was calculating behaviour. You also made arrangements to get out of the country, and your actions after killing Kulsuma were calm and collected. You never lost self-control. Any proper balancing of aggravating and mitigating circumstances requires a substantial uplift from the starting point. Anything other than that would be wholly wrong. I turn to the other offences. Threats to kill. In my judgment, this is category A1 in the relevant guideline, as there was a knife used. It caused serious distress to Kulsuma and had a considerable practical effect as she had to leave her home. Starting point is 4 years custody. It was aggravated by being an offence of domestic abuse, and I would also have reflected the assault offence, for which I would have imposed a concurrent sentence in any event. Stalking In my judgment, this is on the border between B1 and C1. It was intended to maximise fear and distress. You have, as I said, the mitigation of no previous offences. You've also pleaded guilty to having an article with a blade or point. This was an essential ingredient within the murder offence and reflected within the starting point chosen. I have taken into account the principle of totality when considering the impact of these offences on the minimum term. Credit must be given for time on remand. You'll have spent 467 days in custody for this offence. Associated matters. I direct that if the surcharge applies in this case in respect of any of the offences, it should be drawn up in the appropriate amount. A transcript of the sentencing remarks will be attached to your file for the benefit of the parole board. I wish to praise the brave actions of the members of the public involved, and in particular I commend the actions of Dr. Suleiman and his wife, and also the work done of the emergency services and of the police. Everything that could be done was done to try and save Kulsuma's life. I also wish to publicly recognise the work of the West Yorkshire Homicide and Manger Inquiry team in the apprehension of you before you left the country and in the investigation of the offences, just on one element of which will have been the obtaining and viewing of many hundreds of hours of CCTV. A considerable amount of dedicated work has gone into securing justice for Kulsuma Akhtar. Stand up. On the 6th of April 2024, you attacked Kulsuma Akhtar, your wife, in the centre of Bradford on a busy Saturday afternoon, stabbing her to death. You had spent days stalking Kulsuma and trying to trick her out of the safety of the refuge so you could confront her. She was in that refuge because of your violence and threats. Your intention was that if she did not leave and come with you, that you would kill her. After several unsuccessful attempts, you succeeded in getting her to leave by getting your brother to lie to her that you'd gone to Spain. You then had what you were waiting for, the chance to confront her. Within 15 minutes, you had viciously and mercilessly attacked her in the plain view of passers-by. You stabbed her 26 times, including slitting her throat and stamping on her. You then calmly walked off, leaving your son, who you claimed to be missing so much, in his pram. You changed your appearance, travelling to the south, staying with friends, and I have no doubt were ready to flee the country when a visit to the hospital led to your arrest. Having considered the entirety of the evidence, I'm sure that you can be properly described as violent, self-centred, jealous, controlling and coercive, with a firmly held view that your wife was not your equal and should do what you told her to do. You stole a precious young life in a brutal and merciless fashion because of your self-interest and refusal to accept Kulsuma's right to a life free from your violence and controlling behaviour. You have shown no real remorse, only self-pity. For the murder of Kulsuma Akhtar, I sentence you to life imprisonment. You will serve a minimum of 28 years, less the 467 days you have served on remand. For the offence of making a threat to kill, there will be a concurrent sentence of 4 years. For the offence of stalking involving fear of violence, a concurrent sentence of 18 months. For the offence of assault by beating, a concurrent sentence of 21 days. And for the offence of a possession of a bladed article, there will be no separate penalty. I order the destruction of the exhibits as to be agreed. take him down.
Well, there we are. Mr. Justice Cotter, just in the last few seconds, sentencing Habiba Massoum to a minimum term of 28 years, a life sentence for the murder of Kulsuma Akhtar, his 27-year-old wife, who he stabbed to death in an attack that lasted 15 minutes, which left her with fatal injuries on the street of Bradford city centre on the 6th of April, 2024, a busy Saturday afternoon. The judge said, I am sure that you can probably be described as a violent, self-centred, jealous, controlling and coercive person with a firmly held view that your wife was not your equal and you could tell her what to do. And Mr. Justice Cotter described the months in the run-up to the murder, the fear that Kulsuma Akhtar would have experienced month after month, being pursued by her estranged husband, whom she feared. She feared for her life, so much so that she told her sister-in-law that if she was killed one day, she would like her sister-in-law to look after their son, their 7-month-old son, who was there at the time of Kulsuma Akhtar's murder. The judge went on to say, you walked off leading your son, who you claimed to be missing so much, in his pram. So Habiba, he was sentenced to 28 years, and that is the minimum term before he will be considered for release by the parole board. He talked about how they had come to the UK. Kulsuma Akhtar was 27. She'd moved to the UK in March 2022 with her husband. He was on a student visa, going to study a course at the University of Bedfordshire. But when things deteriorated with the two of them, when Kulsuma, he said, blocked your messages, you went to see her, you bought a knife, you took it with you. You said when you fought with her, you felt you would kill her and yourself. So a very, very disturbing series of events which ended up with Kulsuma Akhtar taking a place in a refuge to be safe. However, she posted a message that eventually allowed her husband to track down her location. He sent her a series of messages from a different number trying to trick her out of that refuge. But eventually, after pretending he was in Spain, decided that he would let her think he was in Spain and she would leave the refuge one Saturday afternoon, where he confronted her outside, and that led to the attack in Bradford city centre. But let's go to Danny Savage, who is there at court. Danny, just tell us these events leading up to the murder of Kulsuma Akhtar. So very disturbing. It was months and months of terror for her.
Yeah, the backstory to this is tragic, really, isn't it? You listening to what the judge said today, he delivered it in a very clear, crisp way over the last 20 minutes, the events which led up to Kulsuma Akhtar's murder here in Bradford. And when you go to the scene, I think you talk to people around there who tried to help her that day. It happened in broad daylight on a Saturday afternoon. It was busy, it's a busy road, there would have been people driving past, there were shops nearby, and people went in to try and help her when she was lying, dying on the pavement after being attacked, as her husband just calmly walked away and caught a bus. As you heard from those judges' remarks over the last few minutes, her injuries were purely simply unsurvivable. She was stabbed dozens of times. More than one of those injuries was fatal. A couple of doctors tried to help her as she lay on the ground. Others looked after the baby in the pram, which had been left there as the husband and father walked away. As the judge said, you were vicious, self-centered, controlling and coercive and violent. You stole a precious young life in a merciless fashion, and handing down that minimum sentence of 28 years. But then, of course, we did hear about the build-up, about the episodes of domestic violence which led to this. Habiba Massoum held a knife to his wife's throat at one point at their home over in Greater Manchester before she fled to a refuge here in West Yorkshire. You had victim impact statements as well a little earlier on in the day from her sister-in-law and her brother, and she basically hid the domestic violence from her family until it got so bad that she had to leave and come to the refuge here in West Yorkshire. And then we heard details of how Habiba Massoum basically sort of stalked her, tried to trick her out of there, tried to convince her that he was abroad. He wasn't anywhere near the refuge when she was there, but then she sort of felt that safe, that he was in Spain. He came out, or she came out of the refuge, went shopping, and he confronted her, and it wasn't long after that he stabbed her to death. A tragic, awful ending to a young woman's life. She was very slight. She wasn't very physically big or anything like that. She tried to defend herself, the evidence was, as she was attacked. And so, yes, we now finally have the end of that court case today with that sentencing of 28 years in jail.
Danny, the judge talked about that extraordinary series of events after the murder when Habibur Massoum walked away, he said, from the pram that contained their 7-month-old son that he had claimed to love so much. He got on a bus and it's thought he planned to leave the country.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some new CCTV released today of his sort of body language, if you like, as he left the scene. He did go and catch a bus. It was said in the previous court hearing that he got on that bus smiling, be looking completely relaxed. We heard from the judge then that he sort of rang up his mum in the moments afterwards and then made a series of transactions on his phone in the minutes after he'd carried out the murder. He then goes to the other end of the country. He goes down to Buckinghamshire and effectively changes his appearance. He shaves off his beard, changes his hairstyle, changes his appearance to disguise himself. He was trying to run away and not be caught. And then previously we've had video released by the arresting officers at the time who detained him in a supermarket car park, and you can see that he's looking very calm and composed as he was arrested. But there was no, after he'd done this awful act, which would have required a lot of physical exertion to inflict on his wife, he just walks away. He throws the knife away into a car park. He gets on a bus and he then goes down south a couple of 100 miles away to change that appearance to try and get away with the crime. He simply wasn't going to be able to do that. This was a major investigation by West Yorkshire Police in the days that followed. This was a huge story nationally at the time, in the days that followed as that manhunt was underway. And now finally we get to the final part of this, where Habibur Massoum is sent to jail for 28 years, with the judge very clearly explaining to him his reasoning and thinking, and making it clear to Massoum as well the awful things that he did, and that there was no excuses for it, for any depression or any mental health problems that he may have had. It was a minimal effect on his behaviour that day. He was a horrible man who abused his wife, who was violent towards her over a long period of time, was jealous, often flew off the handle, subjected her to violence at home, so bad that she eventually had to leave. She came to a refuge. He tracked her down through mobile phone technology, and he stalked her until he could find her and kill her. And for that, he's got 28 years in prison today.
Danny, thank you very much. Danny Savage, who's been there at Bradford Crown Court listening to the sentencing of Habibur Massoum. 28 years is the minimum term, that life sentence for murder, and those 4 other offences that we heard about, including stalking and possession of a bladed article. Very, very strong words from the judge, Mr. Justice Cotter, just making it very clear what kind of a nightmare that Kulsuma actor went through for months and months before her eventual murder, ending up in a refuge, and she'd been about to be moved to another one when her husband effectively tricked her to leave that Saturday afternoon, heading for the bazaar, and that's where he confronted her. That's when the murder took place in front of many, many passers-by in Bradford city centre. Let's hear a little of what Mr. Justice Cotter had to say.
On the 6th of April 2024, you attacked Kulsuma Akhtar, your wife, in the centre of Bradford on a busy Saturday afternoon, stabbing her to death. You had spent days stalking Kulsuma and trying to trick her out of the safety of the refuge so you could confront her. She was in that refuge because of your violence and threats. Your intention was that if she did not leave and come with you, that you would kill her. After several unsuccessful attempts you succeeded in getting her to leave by getting your brother to lie to her that you'd gone to Spain. You then had what you were waiting for, the chance to confront her. Within 15 minutes, you had viciously and mercilessly attacked her in the plain view of passers-by. You stabbed her 26 times, including slitting her throat and stamping on her. You then calmly walked off, leaving your son, who you claimed to be missing so much, in his pram. You changed your appearance, travelling to the south, staying with friends, and I have no doubt were ready to flee the country when a visit to the hospital led to your arrest. Having considered the entirety of the evidence, I'm sure that you can be properly described as violent, self-centred, jealous, controlling and coercive, with a firmly held view that your wife was not your equal and should do what you told her to do. You stole a precious young life in a brutal and merciless fashion because of your self-interest and refusal to accept Kulsuma's right to a life free from your violence and controlling behaviour. You have shown no real remorse, only self-pity. For the murder of Kulsuma Akhter, I sentence you to life imprisonment. You will serve a minimum of 28 years, less the 467 days you have served on remand.
Mr. Justice Cotter there sentencing Habibur Masum to 28 years in prison, and that is 28 years as a minimum term before he can be considered eligible for parole. He described Habibur Masum as a violent, self-centred, jealous, controlling and coercive man who had a firmly held view that his wife was not his equal and that you could tell her what to do, that he'd shown no real remorse, only self-pity, and therefore it will be 28 years before you are considered eligible for parole for committing that sustained and excessively violent attack in a city centre in front of passers-by who the judge said would never forget what they had witnessed. 26 wounds on his wife, including a slit throat. He then stamped on her in the street in front of all those people on a Saturday afternoon in Bradford city centre. So let's just show you, we are looking at some microphones outside the court. We've been looking at the judge for the last hour or so, delivering those sentencing remarks. Now the focus turns to outside. We think that West Yorkshire Police will come out very shortly and give a briefing on the case, on the verdict and on the sentence for Habibur Masum. Just to go back to some of the background leading up to the murder, the terrible murder on the 6th of April 2024. It had been a sustained many-month ordeal for Kulsuma Akhter, who had come to the UK from Bangladesh after marrying Habibur Masum. They came to the UK. He brought her there in 2022 when he came over to study at the University of Bedfordshire. But she didn't survive past April 24 after many, many months of fear, of violence, of attacks from her husband, which left her needing to take shelter in a women's refuge. He did not know her location in that refuge until, fatefully, she posted a message which enabled him to track her down. He eventually tricked her into thinking he was on holiday or away in Spain, getting his brother to lie about his whereabouts. And that Saturday afternoon, he was able to confront her as she left the refuge. He'd been waiting there for 3.5 hours, the judge said. She left the refuge to go to the bazaar with a friend, and it was there he confronted her with a knife. He'd been lying in wait for many, many hours. He pulled a knife from his jacket and repeatedly stabbed her in the street, in the city centre, in front of many, many passers-by after she refused to go with him. We then heard what he did afterwards, that he calmly walked away after the ferocious attack. He was even pictured grinning on CCTV as he boarded a bus. Prosecutors in his trial, which ended in that guilty verdict in June, described him as the smiling killer. He then travelled around 200 miles, just over 300 kilometres south to Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire, and the manhunt began. And bizarrely, he was arrested in the early hours of 9th of April in a car park near Stoke Mandeville Hospital because he had had previously a problem with his jaw, which locked when he yawned, and it was triggered that day. Let's go over to the police now and listen in.
Kulsuma was a much-loved daughter, sister, aunt and mother. Her loss has left a gaping hole in the lives of all her family and friends. We've been left with a profound sense of emptiness and a deep and painful void in our lives. She was a loving, caring and kind soul, with a generous nature that touched the lives of everyone she came into contact with. As a family, we miss her beautiful smile, which would light up every room she entered. We will miss her humour, her kindness and her love. We will never forgive the monster who took Kulsuma from us. We do not wish to utter his name. It does not deserve to be mentioned. The monster who savagely took Kulsuma not only from us, but also from her baby son. He will never know her beauty and her kindness. He will never know his mother, other than the memories we as a family will share with him as he grows. He's the only light in all this darkness, and Kulsuma radiates throughout him. Although we are grateful for the judicial process that found him guilty of this crime and for the sentence he has received today, no amount of time in prison will change the life sentence he has inflicted upon us all. No family should have to endure the pain and the heartache we have had to endure since he took Kulsuma's life so horrifically. We can only try and keep her memory alive by continuing to love her and to remember her name. We wish to thank the investigation team at West Yorkshire Police, who have supported us throughout the investigation and throughout the trial. This has been an unimaginable time for us as a family, and one which will stay with us forever. We would now request that our privacy is respected as we continue to grieve our beloved Kulsuma. Thank you all very much.
And there we are, a family statement delivered by West Yorkshire Police from Kulsuma's family, saying that they will never forgive the monster who took Kulsuma from them. They don't want to use his name again. No amount of prison, they say, will change the life sentence he has inflicted on all of us. And her baby son will never know his mother. So that is the end of a very, very tragic trial that has resulted in the sentencing to life with a minimum term of 28 years for Habibur Massoum, who is 27, who killed his wife, Kulsuma Akhtar, who was just 26, in Bradford city centre in April last year. You're with BBC News.